My name is Clara Towson, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
I am Francisca George, and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Susan Leemans, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom. Yeah.
My name is Zainab Sammaz, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hey guys, my name is Sasha Vickery, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hi, my name is Lloyd Harris, and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Jaime Faria, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Yes.
Take one. Well done.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Paulini, and I'm a friend of the show.
Wow, Jasmine, you got it in one time.
Ready. Championship point has arrived. Sinner pointing out, I think there's a light in his face, so he wants that shut off. Here it is. Sinner, middle return. Carlos dancing around the backhand, hit a forehand cross court. Exchanging forehands here. Middle of the court forehand. And Carlos tries to go backhand cross court, but misses it wide. Sinner falls to the floor. And he is the ATP Finals champion in Turin. 2025 caps off a great season for both these guys. Obviously,
hello everyone, welcome to ATP Weekly, and this is a special edition. Not only is it the last ATP Weekly of the regular tour that's concluded with the ATP Finals, but it's a great honor and pleasure to have on Mert Ertunga, someone who I know very well online, and as far as podcasting goes, and playing and writing and coaching and all of that, you're one of the foremost experts. So I'm delighted to have you on to talk some Sinner Alcaraz and discuss the ATP Finals. How are you?
I'm sorry, that was my mistake. But thank you, Vanch. I am delighted to be on, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's many different places that we can start with this. Having just watched Sinner Alcaraz, unfold a final that we've seen so many times this year, the sixth. But what have you noticed from? I guess let's start from a Jannik Sinner perspective. He's come off winning Vienna, Paris, and Turin now, and a lot of talk around improvements that he's made since the U.S. Open as far as the serve goes, because obviously at the U.S. Open he served below 50%, and that kind of combine that with Alcaraz and how flawless he was during that tournament. It just proved to be too difficult, and so he went back to the drawing board. And from my eyes, what I've seen, and from commentators, and also just from observing very closely in terms of his rhythm, and the fact that he's changed his toss a little bit to the left and less. It used to be almost too forward, and he was serving it like maybe tossing it up at like 2:00, and I think now it's at about 11:30, and it's a little bit further back, and I think he's getting really good rhythm on it. And we've seen, up until the U.S. Open, he was serving around 60% first serves in. And you look at post-U.S. Open till now, granted, there's a lot of indoor matches in there, so that helps with the first serve percentage, but he was serving at 68%. So to go from 60 to 68, in that big of a span, before he played against Alcaraz today, what have you seen in terms of his serve that's impressed you?
No, you summarized it very well, and thank you for that information. That's a big jump, and you are correct with the toss, but also his second serve is a lot more. It's got a lot more octane on it. We saw it today. I thought he served fabulously in the first set. It was a big drop in the second set, but on clutch moments in the first set, he served very, very well, and he's getting a lot of free points off of his first serve. And he follows it up with a great second shot for the most part. And he's also places it well. In other words, he distributes it well too. I think today, for example, to the deuce side, if I'm correct, I might be wrong on this, but he's almost 50-50 on going to the tee or wide. And he mixes it up well to where a great returner like Alcaraz, or anyone else for that matter, all the other good returners have trouble guessing which way to go. And he hides it very well with his toss. So, yeah, I would go with his serve. And I also believe that he's using his down the line accelerations a lot more efficiently. As the year progressed, he used them better and better, and that was I felt like that was one of the adjustments that he made today against Alcaraz. He used his down the line accelerations a lot better. He went for them. He missed a couple, he missed a few, but he also made a lot, and that also meant that Alcaraz couldn't read his shots that early and move to the cross court side. I believe this is one of the issues that he worked on when he mentioned being a little bit too predictable back at the US Open, if you remember. And today I thought he course corrected that very well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the second serve and the disguise on the the disguise on the serve, but also the down the line accelerations. I mean, being unpredictable was one of the main things he discussed about. Also using more width on his shots to get Alcaraz further off the court, so then he could open up the angles rather than playing. I felt like he played very linearly at the US Open, and he kind of fed Alcaraz that kind of pace, because it used to be earlier in their rivalry, pre-2024, when Sinner was having a lot of success, he would just rush Alcaraz in the first 4 shots and kind of suffocate him with relentless pace and not allow Alcaraz's creativity to shine. But I feel like in the last couple of years also, I mean, since the start of the year, Alcaraz has made some adjustments to where his forehand and backhand are much more compact. So it's harder to rush him even in really fast conditions. So with Sinner using the backhand down the line and, using other parts of the court like that to open it up, I think was a great adjustment he made. And of course, we have to talk about the set point in the first set that Alcaraz had before the tiebreak. And what did you think about Sinner coming up with a really gutsy 117 mile per hour serve?
Well, that's right, and that's after he double faulted a couple of times in that set earlier, trying to go for big second serves. And that's the kind of pressure that Alcaraz puts on you too, because he was moving inside the court and on the returns. And that's a typical emblematic example of fortune favoring the bold. And on set point, he went for that big second serve. Carlos did move in to take the risk on the return. And I think at that point also Carlos had decided at that stage of the match to try to cut the points a little bit shorter anyway, perhaps because of the slight leg hampering problem that he had. And that was the perfect time for Sinner to go for a big second serve. Now, he could have double faulted, it could have backfired, but nonetheless, he stuck with it and it paid off. It's just a sign of a champion looking to improve little things here and there. Vanch, as you mentioned, you counted a few of them. He also dropped shots better. That's another thing that he added to his game too. So you have to take your hat off to both of these guys. Actually, we're talking about Sinner, but Carlos has done similar things too in terms of progressing his game. So yeah, hats off to Sinner.
Yeah, and you touched on something earlier, which is the hamstring, and of course there was no sign of anything like this coming into the match. And the first 8 games, I thought Alcaraz looked extremely explosive, and he continued to move well throughout the match, even despite the injury. But there were little signs that you could see,
Yes.
like he was coming forward a lot more, trying to end points. Perhaps not that explosive when it came to reading and moving up to drop shots. Perhaps on the return at times, the really wide serves, he perhaps wasn't pushing off as explosively as he was before. So those kind of things. I mean, I felt like it also put immense amount of pressure on Jannik to take advantage. Especially when you see your opponent struggling a little bit, like maybe at 90%, even though, and both these guys know they need to be over basically at 100% fully fit throughout the course of the whole match to have any shot, given how evenly matched they are. So what did you sort of make of that dynamic?
Yeah, look, first of all, they both started the match with no intention of rallying for more than 2 or 3 shots, right? They were both taking a lot of risks, ultra risky first few games. Sinner's down the line backhand miss, for example, in the second game, he went down the line. Carlos got it back and he went for a second down the line and missed it into the doubles alley. That's a sign of him trying to keep the reins of the rally, so to speak. And then he double faulted, at 40-30 at 1-2. That was right where he smacked the second serve there too, and he double faulted, and that was right before the 12-minute interruption. That's another sign of him trying to take risks and finish it quickly. And Carlos was also very, taking a lot of risks. It could have backfired there too, and it didn't. He came out of that game after a 12-minute interruption, came up with 2 big serves and came out of that game clean. And at 4-all, for example, in the first set again, he misses a forehand down the line to go down love 15, but then he makes the next one at 30-15 to go up. So he stuck with it despite a couple of misses early, just like on his serve, on down the line accelerations too. Even though he missed a few early, he stuck with it. And then, you know, at 4, I believe it was 4-3, the last point of the 4-3 game, where we saw Carlos stretch a little bit his leg. And I felt that it did play a role in Carlos's game the rest of the way. Just like you said, he, especially in the second set, he started going for winners very, very early in the rally. I mean, in set 1, you know, he's got an advantage over Jannik on points that are played 5 to 8 shots. He won 14 of them versus 6 for Jannik. Now Jannik won once it went over 9 shots. Jannik won most of them, but the 5 to 8 shots, Carlos did have an advantage over Jannik in the first set. But then in the second set, that goes right back to Jannik. Jannik started winning those points, and Carlos, on the other hand, started going for winners very early. And 0 to 4 shots, he's got 25 winners in set 2, whereas he's got 22 in the first set, even though the first set was longer in terms of total points. So yes, he clearly tried to cut the points short. And you could also see in the couple of drop shots that and there were only important points. One was on a 30-all point, and another one was on a break point, where Sinner did drop shot. Carlos did accelerate, did sprint to the ball, but we didn't see his usual. I mean, when he sprints to a drop shot like that, he takes off and he spreads his legs as wide as possible and extends his racket. You know, he's almost down to the ground. We didn't see that. He did sprint to the ball, but at the end he let it go. He didn't take that extra, you know, slide with the legs apart. So those were little signs where you could see that Alcaraz was having a slight trouble, you know, with his movement. Also on backhand volleys, it's tough to hit a backhand volley when your right leg is, you know, on low ones especially. And even the just to give a last example, even the point at 5-all, 30-15, for those who want to go back and look in the second set, on the 30-15 point, when on his serve at 5-all, he hit a slice backhand that went into the net that, in my opinion, he would have, you know, set his leg up, squared up, and went for a big down the line winner, drive winner, instead of a slice, you know. And that key game, Vance, if you remember, at 3-2 Alcaraz serving, because he broke Sinner's serve right in the beginning of the second set, largely thanks to Sinner's probably worst serving game of the tournament. And then he goes up 2-love and then 3-1. And at 3-2 on his serve, he's at 30-15. He misses a backhand volley that I feel like he would not have missed by 4 meters, you know, under normal circumstances. And then at the very next point at 30-all, he misses a forehand again by a really wide margin, because he kind of stood and hit that forehand, just trusted his arm rather than getting squared. And then at 30-40, followed up that one point that we just talked about, where he, you know, ran to the drop shot but didn't stretch all the way. So it did play a role, but at the same time, just like you said, it's kind of a 90% thing. There's no indication whatsoever that, you know, he would have beaten Sinner had that not happened, and he still played at a very high level. So but it does need to be mentioned nonetheless that it did hamper him at certain points of the match.
Yeah, I'm glad we can have a nuanced discussion about it, because I did, you know, really sense that he wasn't sliding, you know, on some of those drop shot retrievals like he normally would, and there was some, you know, the backhand volley. Normally, he is so good at closing those points off and just either knocking off a great stick volley, or you know,
or a drop shot cross court volley, right? Like on his backhand, even on the full stretch. Sorry to interrupt you, Vance, but even on the full stretch, sometimes he hits this backhand, even though the ball is low, he hits this backhand angle drop shot, spectacular volley that he doesn't just hit once or twice where you could say, oh, he got lucky. That's a shot that he has in his tool bag, and he didn't try that. He just tried to punch it down the line and missed them.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, a couple of key points in the tiebreak as well, with you know, at 3-4, the lob that Sinner hit with you know, the Alcaraz drop shot. of the forehand, and Sinner, got to it in time and hit a great lob, and was able to get that crucial mini break, and then serve it out, and of course the lob on set point, where I did feel like maybe if Alcaraz had his legs under him, maybe either he does more with the drop volley, like you're saying, and doesn't hit it deep to allow Sinner to come up with that lob, or he tries to at least chase the lob down somehow. But I just feel like he maybe was like saving himself for the rest of the match.
Perhaps, and that was a key point, Vance, because he started down a mini break, right? He went down a mini break, I believe 1-3, and then at 4-2, he wins. He gets the mini break back on Jannik's serve, and then at 4-3, there's that point that you just talked about, and I felt like on that drop shot, there's a great angle from behind Carlos on the replay, right after the point is played, and how they show the replay of the point immediately after. And there's a great angle from Carlos, behind Carlos, where he hits the drop shot down the line, correct? And Jannik Sinner is behind the baseline on the forehand corner, on the deuce corner. So it looks like he's hitting it far from Jannik to the correct spot. At first it looks like that. But the problem with that shot, and players get caught in that trap often, is that Jannik, the opponent, is far behind the baseline on the deuce side, so they're already running towards the middle of the court at the baseline to recover. So they've got their sprint momentum already. And where Carlos drop shot it helps Jannik in the sense that Jannik can just continue sprinting in the same direction and get to that ball. Had Carlos drop shotted that cross court, Jannik would have had to make a turn. In other words, come to the middle of the court and turn backwards towards the right, make a sharp turn, and run towards the drop shot on the other side, on the same side that he was recovering from. He would have had to make like a C, the letter C on the court, instead of just running straight across the court to the drop shot. So, I felt like if that drop shot was cross court, Carlos would have still won that point. But that was a key point. That I would say that was the breaking point of the tiebreaker.
Yeah, 100%. And that cross court drop shot that you're talking about, I mean, that's one that Jannik hit to get the break back in the second set.
Exactly. You bring up a great point. Yes. In comparison, let's take that point, where Jannik hits a great cross court deep ball. I believe it was the return was a bit of a miss hit to begin with.
Yeah.
And then I think he hits a forehand that was a little bit of a miss hit also, and it had this high topspin, but Carlos still gets it back from all the way behind the forehand corner, almost in the 2 or 3 yards behind the doubles alley, right? And then he's recovering back to the middle of the court. And what does Jannik do? He drop shots cross court, causing Carlos to turn around and sprint, towards the other side. And he didn't get there. He didn't make that stretch slide that we talked about.
Yeah, certainly. That some of those type of points that Jannik was able to steal today, I feel like that's normally something that he has struggled with in the rivalry when it comes to his conversion score in attack is much lower against Alcaraz than it is against all the other players that he plays, just because of Alcaraz's ability to steal points. But I feel like Jannik getting those crucial ones today in some big spots really kind of flipped the dynamic. But in the second set, we did also see Sinner's serve dropped quite dramatically. His first serve, and he sort of started to go back towards old habits. I think he served at 47%. Now, it really didn't matter because he was very effective when he did make it in. And obviously he was effective at backing up his second serve. But do you feel like maybe Alcaraz, I mean, certainly Alcaraz went up a break because Sinner played that poor service game, double faulted twice, just his worst service game of the tournament. But at 3-all, Alcaraz did have another chance to break. And that's where he misses the forehand that he was set for and in position that he just overcooks.
Yes.
And I guess perhaps it was another one of those shots that he was just trying to explode off of and maybe try to come forward on, that resulted in Sinner getting out of that game and keeping up the scoreboard pressure. But
yeah, no, Vance, all of those are very correct observations. Yes, he missed. I think, in fact, he missed a couple of those forehands, right? Because they were kind of in the middle of the court, neutral shots, and wasn't one of them on like a break point or maybe to break Sinner back again. I can't remember the exact point, but one of them was on a very important point on a long game. And yeah,
3-all 30-40, with Alcaraz.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. You know, these are but nonetheless, let's keep in mind that Carlos still played at a very high level. And just to make a general comment, Vanch, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I'm looking at I'm looking at the matches. These were the 8 best players on the ATP Tour. And I'm looking at today's match, even with these conditions that we talk, we just, digged around and we said, well, okay, Sinner didn't serve well in the second set. Jannik made a double fault at a certain spot. I said earlier, we talked about Carlos maybe not able to play his best in the second set because of this slight leg injury and this and that. Even with all that, I'm looking at this match, and I'm looking at the matches between the 6 other players in the tournament.
Yeah.
And I feel like these guys are playing at warp speed 9, and the others are on just impulse power. And
I could not agree with you more.
Yeah.
They're literally playing a different sport compared to the rest of the tour when it comes to even looking at the top 8. I mean, the only match that I can think of that probably comes close in some of the dynamics was the Fritz Alcaraz match for 2 sets, where I did feel like Fritz did a really good impersonation, perhaps the best amongst the 8 players of what a matchup between Alcaraz could look like. But even there, they weren't playing at this kind of a speed, and it didn't really hinge to a couple of points like it did today. Like, this is a different level altogether.
Yeah, I mean, the proposal that these 2 guys are putting on the table is, this is our level. You're going to have to play this type of level to beat us in the slams over 5 sets. And thus we have these 2 guys in the finals of the last 7 slams. It's just, there's no mystery there.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I do want to move on to some of the other things. Big picture, obviously, with the rivalry, there was perhaps more pressure on Jannik in these circumstances, you would say, to get this win. And, he handled it quite brilliantly in terms of, home crowd in Italy, favorite surface, fast indoor hard court. Obviously, given the way the rivalry had gone with Alcaraz winning 7 of the last 8, you really felt like Sinner needed this win more than Alcaraz did. At least that was my impression, especially after Alcaraz, sealed the year at number 1. And so what do you think that does to the rivalry moving forward? And obviously, the potential meeting of the Australian Open.
I know it's hard to compare the two. I was going to draw a comparison from a certain point of time with the Federer and Nadal rivalry. If you remember, in 2006, Nadal was beating Federer left and right, and it came that moment at Wimbledon in 2006 where I think Federer was something like 6-1, but 1-6 against Nadal up to that point, and Wimbledon was kind of like the last stand. He better win that, or else, or else. And he did win. He beat Nadal there, and then for the next couple of years, at least on hard courts and on surfaces other than clay, they reached some kind of equilibrium. And I felt like this was going to be one of these situations where if Carlos won, because didn't he win 6 out of the last 7? Although we're including the default or the retirement in that streak, right? Something
right.
like that.
3 in a row last year, and then 4-1 this year before this.
Yeah.
So 7 of the last 8. I mean.
And just like it was, grass course was Roger's last stand there in that particular moment. This is kind of, it felt like Jannik's last stand here, in front of his own crowd, on his favorite surface indoors. He's been undefeated for 2 years, and this is a match that he did not want to lose. So I'm totally on your camp when you make that observation about Sinner being under more pressure to win this match, even though he didn't finish the year ranked number 1.
Yeah, exactly. All good points. I mean, I guess maybe final question is, like, who do you think is more likely to get the career slam now that they're both, obviously Jannik came so close this year at Roland Garros, and Alcaraz will have the first shot at it, and they'll each try to stop the other from winning, 3 in a row on their turf.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Alcaraz just because chronologically he's got the first shot at it, to win the Australian Open. But it's 50.5% to 49.5% type of thing. So if he doesn't get it at the Australian Open, you ask me the same question after that, and I'm going to say the reverse, because then Jannik has a shot at the French Open to get the career slam. And it's a big challenge, and these guys, probably it's these little details at this point in their rivalry that's going to motivate them, to kind of get the upper hand on the other. But barring injury or barring some unfortunate situation, I'm going to say we're going to see these two guys again in the finals of the Australian Open, 90%, and Carlos will have a first shot at it. Now it's hard to know what's going to happen. It's still a couple of months away, so we'll have to wait and see what the tournaments right before Australian Open show. And who's going to get the first career slam? I'm at a loss. I mean, I'm going 50.5% Carlos, 49.5% Jannik at this moment, only because Carlos will have the first shot at it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that. And obviously, these two are going to try to have a lengthier off season because they're not going to play anything, leading up to the Australian Open, like no United Cup or any of those other tournaments. So.
Okay. Well, then here we go. Next meeting will probably be at the AO then.
But I'm very curious to see if Alcaraz does play the Davis Cup finals. Just considering he has this hamstring issue, I do wonder if he'll,
That would be the only reason why he would not. I think otherwise he would play. I mean, I don't know. The Spanish guys take Davis Cup pretty seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some pressure from Ferrer's side too. At least, try to. Get Carlos to play, but I'm, it's nonetheless. I do feel like the off season is going to be where they just get to work and they study these matches a bit like and after Wimbledon, I think Carlos and his team spoke about doing like a 15-day training camp and just focusing purely on Jannik Sinner and his patterns, and it almost feels like they're just ignoring the rest of the tour, and it's like, okay, we'll beat the rest, but let's focus on each other, kind of a thing.
Yeah, but again, can you seriously blame them? Because Vanch, I feel like other players are also looking to improve, but they have holes to fill, in their game. Even the 6 other guys, if we were to try to dissect the 6 other guys, we would find a certain shot that they need to develop, or a certain shot that they need to just even attempt, right? So that some of them don't even attempt all the shots that you can that in the tennis book. But you look at these two guys, and you can't really come up with a clear weakness. If there's any weakness at all, and we're talking about tiny bits, you have to pull by the hair to find any type of a weakness. It only comes out when they play each other. The other players are not able to exploit any type of weakness when they play these two guys. So these two guys are going to try to improve their game, which they are, by the way. They're getting better and better still. We can comfortably say that they're not even at their peak, perhaps, and there you can visibly see their improvements, and the other guys are just trying to catch up to where they can even get to the point where they don't have holes in their games that can be exploited. So it's a steep hill to climb for the other players. Now, it might happen at one point in the future. I'm just not sure that it can happen in the very near future. I mean, I feel like what we saw this year could repeat next year. I feel like if you asked me before Roland Garros this year, who's going to be in the finals, and I would have probably said something like Carlos and Jannik, and the only player perhaps that can break this party is Novak Djokovic. And if you asked me this before Wimbledon, I'd probably say the same thing. It sounds like a broken record, but that's where we are at this point.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like it's gonna either take 2 or 3 years, or someone else emerging, because it really does feel like it's we could see a repeat again in 2026 of them splitting the 4 majors and being in the finals of all 4, or at least 3 out of the 4 like we saw this year. So, but I guess one of those players.
Let me ask you a question back. How we said during the big 3 years, if X wasn't around, Y would have won so many slams. If Y wasn't around, Z would have won so many slams, etc. We said that all the time for the big 3 players. Now imagine if Sinner wasn't around, how many slams would Alcaraz have by now, or vice versa? If Carlos wasn't around, how many slams would Sinner have had by now? Or would we have seen the Grand Slam? And I think you responded to that anyway on X, and it was a great response. But yeah, it's wild if you start thinking in that sense. It's a good thing that perhaps these two guys are playing at the same time, and we'll see this rivalry for many years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess someone who's trying to, make a good case for being, certainly the third or fourth best player right now has been Felix since the start of August. With Cincinnati quarterfinals, U.S. Open semis, took a set off of Jannik there, makes the final in Paris, gets out of his group here. Two big wins over Zverev as well, en route to the U.S. Open semis, and then here. So what have you seen in terms of his progression? Obviously, we saw him finish year-end number 6 in 2022, and he wasn't quite able to continue that momentum for a myriad of reasons. Some of that injury-related, and the rest, obviously, there were still holes in his game to patch up. But where do you see now, 3 years on? He's 25. He's supposed to be sort of in the peak of his career now. Do you think this is something replicable that he can take and also do outdoors and perhaps more consistently through 2026?
Yeah, you see this with a lot of players when they're young and they're upcoming, and they reach a certain amount of success, which Felix did early in his career, and then they have a little bit of a struggle in the year or 2 or 3 that follow that. They kind of have what Americans call sophomore jinx, And then when they come back, though, when they recover from that, they're more mature, more grounded. And they're their mental state is well framed, and I feel like Felix is in the process of reaching that moment. And again, barring injury, he is one of the 2 or 3 guys that you can count that could possibly continue developing his game and reach and challenge these 2 guys. I don't know when. I don't know. I don't think it'll be anytime soon, but in a couple of years or 3, it's possible. Because again, Felix's game is very well set. He can do a lot of things. He's a very good athlete. So in terms of movement, he can be right up there with these 2 guys, and he can generate power, which is another quality that these 2 guys have. He just cannot do it as consistently and as well as these 2 guys yet. But in terms of what you can possibly see in the future, if there are going to be any guys challenging these 2 guys, I would put him on top of the list with 2 or 3 guys to do that. So yes, it was very encouraging. This late year surge by Auger-Aliassime was super encouraging in my opinion. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I 100% would, and I just think he has a better understanding in terms of his strengths and weaknesses of, realizing like, yeah, I need to be imposing. I need to come in. I need to use my forehand in terms of applying offensive pressure, and obviously
he's got pretty good fundamentals. I feel like in terms of technique, yeah.
And I've liked the way he's mixed in the slice and gone with the backhand down the line a little bit more often, just to change things up and just believe and back himself a little bit more in those really big spots. And granted, he didn't. You could say the match against Alcaraz kind of exposed some of his weaknesses, the backhand mostly. Just having a much weaker wing just kind of limits him against Alcaraz and Sinner. But there's still so many great things that he's done in the last 3-4 months that I feel like he can build on in the off season and continue.
Definitely. It's they're hard to come by, these moments where we can actually speak about a player possibly improving by leaps and bounds and catching up with the 2 other guys. But this is one of those moments.
Yeah, and someone else who impressed me quite a bit during the tour finals was Alex de Minaur, because for Alex to bounce back the way he did,
yes,
in the tough moments, obviously to bounce back from basically having Lorenzo Musetti, basically 2 points away from the match. He was at 5-4, 30-15, and he had a volley on top of the net. And, there were so many chances for Demon to show more this year against the top players, but he just couldn't quite get over the hump and couldn't get that win. So for him to bounce back, and he called it one of the darkest points in his career after that loss, to then play the kind of imposing style that he did against Fritz and get a big win there, and then also really push Sinner, like really played well against Jannik for the first 10 games, with Sinner serving at 80% and given the rivalry and the score heading in of being 0-12, the way he's acquitting himself and sort of adapting and adding new layers to his game and improving is impressive, because he's really kind of maximizing everything at this point.
Yeah, there was a guy back in the late 90s, Rainer Schüttler, German guy, and he's actually the BJK Cup captain now for Germany. And this guy didn't have a flashy game whatsoever. And every year for about 6 or 7 years, his ranking kept improving. And then he finally got into top 10. He even made the finals of the Australian Open one year. And I kind of draw a parallel between him and Alex de Minaur. They've got the same work ethic. And the one problem, the one big issue with Alex de Minaur is his shots just don't carry the same weight that many of the other players carry. Well, this is probably no secret, by the way, what I'm just saying here. His ability to strike winners out of nowhere, or all of a sudden hit a high octane flashy winner, are just not there. So it's a long way for him still, but he is improving every year, correct? And he played a superb first set, actually, in the against Sinner. And what he needs to do is he just needs to put more on the table for the opponent to fear. Not just when opponents play him, they're saying, oh gosh, this is going to be a tough match. He's going to get everything back. They know that they're in for a long match, and they know that they're not going to get any gifts, and they know it's not going to be a walk in the park. And that in and out of itself is already a big challenge that many of the other players cannot handle. That's why he's got a successful career already. But when you have to play against these top players, you have to put something more on the table that they feel like they cannot answer. And that's what's lacking in de Minaur's game. And I'm pretty sure I'm fairly sure he's aware of this, and he's working on it. And it's not just, it doesn't have to be necessarily striking winners out of nowhere from the baseline like Alcaraz does, or like even Ben Shelton does. But it can be something like perhaps, using the slice more, perhaps developing a great slice serve to the outside and serving and volleying as a surprise tool, or simply doing these rallies where he just some surprise advances to the net, where he takes the ball in the air and whacks it for a swing volley. Just little things like that. It doesn't have to be necessarily, he doesn't have to turn into Jannik Sinner to be able to pull this off, but he does need to put more on the table, in terms of installing fear in the opponent's mind during rallies.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's quite adept at, hugging the baseline and half volleying shots and then coming in and hitting good volleys. Like, I do feel like that is something he has in his repertoire that, could be something he could deploy a bit more. Some kind
Definitely,
of
he's got great footwork. People who have who are super quick with their feet and who can move in and hit, catch some balls in the air and put surprising volleys away, especially if the opponent is on the run and on the stretch and they're floating the ball back. He's got the footwork to do that. This is something that he could do. He could use more often. You just brought up a great point.
Yeah, because I do feel like his default mode of, playing extremely well defensively and using his speed is great against most players, but it's not going to get it done against the top two guys. So
yes, he'll win 90% of his matches. I'm throwing numbers out of my head, but against that 10%, he'll never get it done. And you want to sometimes do something to where for a little while you might win less than 90% of your points, but in the long term, you get to a stage where you're able to beat some of those 10%. You're able to win some of those 10%.
Yeah. Speaking of taking risks, another player that I guess we should talk about is also Alexander Zverev, who's won this tournament twice, and he made the finals of the Australian Open. But just so many signs this year of like listless performances from Sasha, and like performances that just sort of make you wonder, like, I don't want to be too dramatic. Like, he's still going to be a top 10 player and he's still going to win a ton, but I just wonder, like, if there's signs of decline happening in terms of being able to, like, he looks further away now from being able to challenge the top two than he did a year ago. So for me, in terms of, the rest of his season, he finished the year number 3 in the world, but it was really sort of like barely over Djokovic. And he played so many tournaments, and it just feels like outside of that Australian Open, he's kind of in danger of falling down the rankings a little bit if he doesn't defend those points. But merely just stepping up and playing assertive tennis in the big moments is still not really happening, especially off the forehand wing. So I'm curious to get your thoughts.
Yes, well, he's number 3 on paper, but I think everyone can agree that Novak Djokovic is the actual number 3 and not Zverev. And you said the decline. I would be more inclined to say stagnation. I feel like he hasn't added to his game anything really in the last 2 or 3 years. He's got a great serve, for example. He's got one of the best serves on the tour. And then he doesn't have the 1-2 punch like Carlos and Jannik and even some other players like Ben Shelton do. And he gets a great serve in, and then he doesn't hit. You look at his matches; he's got these super serving numbers, but he doesn't have many winners. And you feel like some of these returns must be coming back weak, and you should be hitting winners off of them on the second shot. And you just don't see that with him. And the gap is widening between him and the top two. I'm not sure that he's declining, but it's certainly widening because he's stagnating and the other two are just moving forward.
Yeah, certainly if you don't improve. I mean, he's definitely one of those players that I think thought his time would come. And, then came these two who just kind of, really usurped him. And I mean, you can see it in the rankings. The gap between him and Jannik is bigger than the gap between him and something like 1,000 in the world. So
doesn't it, even if you gifted like 4 1,000s to Zverev, I think he still doesn't catch up with Jannik, right? Or something like that, something crazy like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. He's like over 5,000 points behind.
That's outrageous.
And he played like double the number of tournaments too. So it's
yeah. He played 10 more tournaments than Djokovic has, right?
Yes.
Or 23 to 13, something like that.
Yes.
That's crazy. That's wow.
Yeah, and I guess something I wanted to ask you about was his forehand, because I do feel like, it is a conversation, like, is it a technical thing or is it kind of more of like get out of your shell and come through it? Because there were times where he was playing against Sinner where his forehand speeds were somewhere in the mid to high 80s actually in miles per hour. But then the game that he got broken, it was down to 64 miles per hour, and he was having a lot of trouble just, going after it in those spots. And even against Felix, some of those, I feel like Felix was able to use his backhand on the line slice really effectively and get Zverev to kind of lift on that shot. And it just feels like there's some technical opponent as well. So I'm curious to get your view on that.
That's been an issue with him since his junior years. Even when he was very young, the rap on him was, play to his forehand or play a couple of times to his backhand and then play one to his forehand where he has to stretch and hit. His stretch forehand is a weakness, has always been one. He hits it off of his back heel when he's caught in that position, and there's sometimes loopy and short, and the opponents jump on top of that. And to this day, he hasn't really corrected that. And look, Vanch, if one shot like that for you has been an Achilles heel for you throughout your career, you can develop your game. Even if you can't find a solution to that shot, you can develop your game such that you don't have to hit that shot many times. So what could that be? That could be that if you do get it to your forehand, you just go for a winner. You take the exchange where you go for 10 winners and make 6 and miss 4 versus just hitting it in 10 times, because you probably won't win 6 out of those 10 points. And you adjust your game. In other words, you go for the winner, or you get more aggressive. You develop an all-court game where you come to the net a lot. And that way, that weakness doesn't stare at your face as with big eyes like it used to. But he hasn't done that either. He hasn't developed his net game much. His volleys are still not very dependable. So it's right. this stagnating level where he's been at for the last few years. He plays a lot of tournaments. He does well in some Masters, so he keeps his ranking. But will he ever will he ever win a major, or will he ever reach the level of the top two? At this point, no, I don't think so. I think it's past him, that chance.
Yeah, I really do. And it's still one of those things where, like, I think he can get to a major semi, a final, maybe if the draw breaks, right? But it's like,
Draw breaks, yes.
the scar tissue has just accumulated so much with a lot of those losses. The U.S. Open final in 2020, the 2-1 up on Carlos, and last year.
Yeah, that looking back, that may have been by far his best chance to win a slam, because I don't think he'll get another chance like that. And furthermore, not even considering how far away he's from the top two guys, but other guys are going to catch up to him now, probably within a year or two. He might be in the same situation where now, instead of two guys above him that he's looking at, he's got 4 or 5 of them. So one of his luck, he's a bit lucky that some of the other guys that were coming up along with him in the late 2010s or early 2020s also stagnated along with him, so he's able to remain there. But this younger group of players that are coming up, they're going to surpass him pretty soon.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you're already seeing him having a lot of issues against Taylor Fritz, for example, that he's lost his last 6, or guys like Musetti, and even Medvedev. Even though he's declined, he seems to really have Zverev's number. And there's just going to be a lot of players in the mix that I feel like he's not one of those guys that you can be like, oh, it's Sinner and Alcaraz. He has a Sinner and Alcaraz problem. It feels like it's just stagnation in general. So that's a good way to sort of sum it up. But I think someone who hasn't stagnated is actually Taylor Fritz, because
yes.
To put together another season, but he's finished in the top 6, I think is really great, given his, the first half of the year, he was struggling with quite a lot of injuries. He has a great grass season, comes within, a set point of pushing Alcaraz to 5 there, plays another great match with him here, doesn't get out of the groups, but wins plenty of matches in the second half of this season. And you feel like he can replicate this next year as well.
Yes. And, there's a guy who let's face it, he has holes in his game too, right? His net game is nowhere near where his baseline game is, right? He's got this attacking baseline game where he can generate great power. He's got a very good serve, and he can hit a second shot also, but he's reluctant to come to the net, right? And he's trying to come to the net. He's got a great coach, Michael Russell, who has pushed him, and his game is improving. And I feel like I'm sure they are now working on his all-court game in terms of transition to the net. And it's not just his volleys, to be honest with you. It's also the hitting the approach and taking those first 3 or 4 steps forward quickly, so that you get to hit that first volley inside the service line. And because this is not something that he's done previously in his career regularly, it's not just the technique and what you have to do, but it's also a mental approach, right? You have to hit that shot with the intention of coming into the net behind, and that'll put you on the path to the net quicker than otherwise, like hitting an approach and say, oh, is it good enough? Should I come in? Should I not come in? That split second hesitation can put you back a couple of yards on your way into the net. So this is something that mentally that he has to integrate into his thinking, and he has to improve his volleys. But I'm a big admirer of Fritz, because I've heard from even coaches in 3-4 years ago that he was going to get stuck with the kind of game that he's playing, that he's not going to be, it's just one dimensional and he's not doing enough, et cetera, et cetera. He also doesn't have necessarily a flashy style, so maybe he goes under the radar sometimes. But what he has accomplished here in the last 2 or 3 years, to get to the point where he's able to challenge now, the top 5 and pull out some good matches even against the elite is impressive. His footwork has improved tremendously. So let's see what happens. The only question about Fritz is is his ceiling high enough? In other words, if he reaches his ceiling, is that going to be enough to be number one, to be one of the elite players who wins slams? That's the only question mark. But his work ethic and his improvement is something to behold.
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly agree with you about the ceiling point because, he can do all these things and make all these gains, and including working on the transition game and I guess the footwork and positioning at the net in order to volley better is definitely something. I mean, against Alcaraz, I mean, that was the difference maker, how Alcaraz was able to steal so many points, you know, with Fritz in attacking positions with volleys, and I believe it was like 23 for 26 at the net for Carlos, and something like 12 or 30, and they were pretty much even in every other department. So I guess the question is just because athletically and genetically, I don't think he quite has that, and it's something he's had to work on, and he's done a great job in terms of his fitness regimen, and I guess improving, being able to be in positions be in good positions against elite players. But I also wonder, like, he plays Gael Monfils in the third round of the Australian Open, or he plays matches against like guys who are really fast and who get a lot of balls back, and who at times can get used to that pace, right? Because they have, they maybe have a little more variation. They're a little bit more speedy. They're able to force those kind of force Fritz into uncomfortable positions like that. So I do sort of wonder if he'll be able to consistently get by those guys and put himself in positions enough in the deep end of slams. It feels like he has a good window here for about 2 or 3 years, but it's going to be tough to see him, I guess, in another major final again, or in another like winning position, I guess.
No, you summarized it very well. It's going to be a challenge, but Vanch, he's one of these guys who, if the draw opens up, could pull off a slam title or even a final, right? And I cannot say that for many other players, quite frankly. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the matchup that he has with Zverev, for example, or like you would probably back him in a situation like that more than Zverev at this point. But I guess someone else, who does have a very flashy game is Ben Shelton, and a lot of people tout him as kind of the guy, as one of the candidates behind Sinner and Alcaraz to potentially become the third guy. But and it's been a good year for Ben. Like, he has made some progress. He started
For
out
sure.
21 in the world, and he will finish in the top 10. Obviously, he played a great match against Carlos at Roland Garros. He got the title in Canada, and at times it did feel like some of the momentum that he gained, in that summer, and then getting injured, definitely sort of, it wasn't the best. It really wasn't a good finish to the season that he would have liked. Here going 0-3, but what did you sort of, what do you make about him, just sort of big picture in general? Because there's so many areas that I feel like he can get a lot better in, and that's both encouraging, but also, you wonder how much those things will improve in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Ben Shelton is an interesting case because, first of all, like you said, he's got a lot of areas that he can improve, and he is improving them, by the way. And he's getting a lot better. I think he has one of the best, how do I say this, body languages on the tour, in terms of showing to the opponent that he's there to fight all the way to the end. I think one of the commenters said earlier, I believe it was Super Dave, if I'm not wrong, he said he'll take Shelton's attitude over Felix Auger-Aliassime's fundamentals. I don't know about that comparison, but I agree with him that Shelton's attitude is great. And so he's got that in his pocket. It's probably his best quality. And his next best quality is his serve. He's got a great serve, correct? I mean, lefty, he can place it anywhere on the court. But also, again, we're coming back to the same thing in comparison to the top two guys. He does have holes in his game. He rarely goes down the line with his backhand. His backhand most of the time goes cross court. I don't have any stats to back this up, but when I'm watching him, I don't see him go down the line much with his backhand. And he's a lefty, which means his backhand would go most of the time to the other player's backhand, assuming that the other player's backhand is weaker. He doesn't use that very often. I mean, you never see him engage in a deep rally back and forth, and then with the backhand all of a sudden pull off this big down the line drive off of a cross court shot. I'm not saying he doesn't ever do it, but he doesn't do it enough. And another thing that I noticed in this tournament, he's got this I don't know how to explain this, but he's a lefty, right? And when you watch lefties, like Rafa used to do at the time, or Verdasco, or even Gilles Muller, a guy like Gilles Muller. These guys hit a lot of, and other lefties do this too. I just those three guys for some reason came to my mind. Is they hit this forehand cross court to the sideline, Vanch.
Yes.
It's a sharp cross court, not your usual regular deep cross court, but a sharp cross court. I'm not talking about the angle shot either. Not the angle shot where you just kind of take off the pace a little bit and you angle it and you drop it right behind the net to where it's like to the stands, and it's a very hard shot to pull, but some players do it. And Shelton doesn't use, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a regular hit, paced, heavy topspin, forehand, sharp cross court to the sideline, which makes the opponent go out to the doubles alley or even further outside the doubles line to retrieve. He doesn't hit this shot enough, and he's a lefty. And so to me, like a lefty should use that shot more often. And the same problem I thought in the beginning of the year, during the months that he was playing, Jack Draper had this issue too. I felt he's got a great forehand, can finish it off, down the line or cross court, can hit winners, but he can hit winners in the sense that anyone else who can hit winners. He doesn't use the cross court and sharp cross court enough to the sideline. So okay, coming back to Shelton, if you noticed, I don't know if you heard this, but I heard it on TV. I mean, Brian, his dad, told him in the beginning of the third set versus Felix. He said, Felix is hitting a lot of forehands. Play more to his backhand. Go for the sidelines. He specifically said this, and I thought, okay, great. We'll see it, and we didn't. He didn't do enough. It's almost like he didn't hear his dad, or he didn't. In other words, he didn't try to add that specifically to his game in the third set. So, this is just to mention that there are holes in their games in these other guys. But coming back to your question, just to give a general answer, Ben Shelton is another one of these guys who I would put him not necessarily in the same exact bucket as Felix in terms of chronological progress, in terms of time, but he has the capacity to eventually get to the point where he can win big titles if he keeps improving the right way. Let's not ask too much of him either. I mean, look where he's come in the matter of a year and a half. So let's give him some time, and he's top 10 now, and he can, again, barring injury, I think there's big potential with Ben Shelton.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a great summary, and I definitely feel like in the Felix match, he did not try to expose Felix's backhand enough. I mean, there were so many times where his distribution was more towards Felix's forehand or down the middle, or just allowing Felix to hit so many runaround forehands from the outside where he's just so much more comfortable. And I didn't feel like Felix was pressured enough in those moments. And I also feel like for as big as the serve is and how versatile it is and how much work it has on it, I don't feel like he does enough. I don't feel like he hits his spots as well as he can yet. And I also feel like occasionally he'll take a lot of pace off of it, and you'll just kind of be like, whoa, that was a kind of a nothing burger serve. And it looks like that. And he'll sort of just come in and approach. And sometimes I just feel like, tactically he plays a lot on instinct, but not so much on sort of strategic know-how. It's more so on just feel the moment, intuition, and then if the match gets really close, he gets involved in a lot of these like lottery 50-50 type of matches where he's having to play a lot of breakers, and it just kind of feels like there's a lot of improvements he can make with that.
Yes, his gung-ho attitude, like always pumped up and fist pump and all that, perhaps does impact his mental discipline at times. You're right, he does play on instinct a lot, and
or just
Jim
one more thing
Courier
that I also realized is sometimes when he would hit a good serve, he'd have the opponent out of position, but then he just missed the +1, or he just missed the easy forehand on top of the net, and it's like those kind of points. Like he's up 6-3 against Zverev in the second set tiebreak, and he has the forehand that he wants, but it's just, he just kind of dumps it in the net, or it's just he misses the put away.
Right, exactly. He needs to get more. There's a great quote that Jim Courier said back in the early 90s when him, Sampras, and Agassi and Chang were starting to dominate, and he said it took a couple of years, but Pete got his game organized under structure, and then he took off while the rest of us watched from behind. And this is the kind of thing that Ben Shelton needs. He needs better organization, right? Better structure, more discipline.
Yeah, because I did feel like over the summer he was starting to develop a little bit more of the discipline. He was using his athleticism well, because I do think he's quite a great athlete. He can cover quite a bit of court.
Agreed.
But he just needs to kind of rely on that a bit more and use that patience. But I feel like maybe since the US Open, it has been quite a bit disorganized. But let's see a year from now, because like you said, I've seen great improvement from end of 2024
for
till
sure.
now, so.
And he's using variety on his shots too. I've seen him use the slice some. I've seen drop shot. He does come to the net when he gets the chance. His volleys could still improve, but they're not bad. But he just needs to fill a couple of those holes in his game and just get more organized.
Yeah, I totally agree. And of course, the last player we should talk about is Lorenzo Musetti, who got in. But it was a very sort of there was a whole fiasco there in Athens with him and Novak, and they played this grueling match in the final, really high quality match, by the way. But Djokovic pulls out, but he makes it, and he had a great clay season, Lorenzo, and he was gassed coming into this week. So for him to get one win here against Alex, in front of his home crowd, and put in a decent effort considering the circumstances. What have you made of his game? Not even so much this week, but just more generally. As his career has gone on, like, did you think he was someone who could be a top 10 player and challenge these guys in certain conditions?
Well, he's the last man standing with the one-handed backhand, right? He's still making it live on, so to speak. Yeah. And he had a great clay court season. I know that he reached the semifinals at Wimbledon, I believe. When was that? 2 years ago?
Yep. Last year. Yep.
Last year. But even then, I don't know if he has holes in his game necessarily, but he's got to improve on other surfaces. And to improve on other surfaces, you need to develop certain shots. And his one-handed backhand, sometimes I feel like he just needs to move inside the court and take it early, kind of like Roger did in 2017. He decided to work on that and just move inside the baseline and accelerate. Otherwise, they're going to keep picking on his backhand. Because one-handed backhand in today's power game, you better have a out of this world slice to use on defense to be able to get balls back, or you've got to be running around it all the time and hitting forehands. Now he does run around and hit some forehands, but he also uses his backhands quite a lot. He's not one of these guys like Jeremy Chardy who parks at the corner of the court and hits all forehands. And granted, his backhand, he can create some good shots with his backhand too, but when he has the time, and he doesn't have that kind of time on fast surfaces against power hitters, or against a guy like Alcaraz, whose rotation on the ball on the topspin is so heavy that he's got really no choice but to use the slice. He cannot really come over the top of that. So you either have to work on a specific shot, like moving inside the court and accelerating your backhand down the line, or just simply developing a great backhand down the line so that your opponent has to run to the forehand corner and possibly hit it back to your forehand, so that you can start developing the point with your forehand. So he's got to work on these one or two specialty shots that can set the rest of his game up better. I don't know what the stats are on that, but I don't know if his success rate at the net is very good. Maybe it is. I'm not sure, but I see him more as a baseliner, and I would like to see a little bit more points at the net one from him when he gets the chance. Of course, you don't want to run to the net just for the sake of running to the net, but when you do get the short balls, you have to put more on the table, a bit like we were talking about for Alex de Minaur. Right? Yeah. They're not the same type of player by any means, but they need to do more with balls that are bouncing neutral on the service line inside the court, where they can just hop on top of it and take it on the rise and create some chances.
Yeah, it's a very good point about him at the net, because I feel like he gets drawn in a lot of cat and mouse exchanges, because the rule book is, even though he's fast, drop shot him, because he does, give up a lot of court. So then he's good with his speed at anticipating some of them and winning points like that, but you very rarely see him sort of, on the front foot coming in off of a let's say a damaging forehand and then looking to finish that way. So that could be something different.
I feel like he's Vance. That's great. That you summarized it well. I mean, the only thing I can add is I feel like he needs to play more proactive and less reactive. That's basically I can just sum it up with that sentence.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I have seen improvements for instance, on his serve. Like he has really beefed up that shot, and it does look like he's looking for more forehands after it. And I have seen, for example, I mean, I guess the match against Novak in Athens, where he was, I guess trying to do a little bit more. Like the first set that he played against Djokovic in Athens is the best set I've ever seen him play on a hard court, where he was just being way more damaging in the first 4 shots of rallies. But it didn't seem like it still seems like this is something new that he's getting used to, and not something that we have a whole lot of.
Yeah. Would you say you'd probably know this better than because you've watched him more lately than I have? Has his second serve gotten to the point where opponents cannot jump on top of it? I know his first serve improved, but
I think he has a good.
Have you noticed anything on that?
But I think he has a good kick serve. But if he doesn't hit his spot, I think it's still being prone to being quite attacked on that shot.
Yeah,
and he's having to play reactive and defense from there, which
maybe that's something to watch in the next few months on his matches. I don't know if they keep that kind of stat on the websites where you can see the spot where his second serve drops. If they're all around the same spot, I think that's something that he needs to improve. But I would have to wait and see. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and you always kind of worry about players in that Richard Gasquet mode where their backhand is sort of more, they're on average hitting more backhands than forehands, and so you do sort of want him to become more forehand centric as his career goes on. But it's such a tough thing, with the one hander and having the kind of skills that he has to sort of make that next step, because still can't quite say he's a top 10. You can't say he's a top 10 player yet on hard courts for sure. So
that's true. And one thing that he could do eventually, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but one thing that he could do, for example, let's say Carlos Alcaraz, for example. Anybody who plays against Carlos has to run so much ground. I mean, they have to cover so much real estate. He hits drop shots, short angles, deep down the lines, pushes you back, pulls you forward, lobs you. You just run like a madman against him when you're playing. And I think, for example, in the match against Fritz, Alcaraz once Alcaraz got the upper hand late in the second set, you could just see the change of the guard. Up to that point, Fritz was actually looking like he was going to win that match, right? I mean, at 4-all at 15:30, he had the open court and couldn't put it away. And then Alcaraz came back and wins the tiebreaker. And when the third set began, you could just see that Fritz lost something in his legs, right? And that has a lot to do with how much he had to run the first 2 sets against Alcaraz. And when you're no longer leading in the scoreboard, that mental adrenaline that carries you when you're physically fatigued is no longer there because you're behind. And therefore, you start feeling even more the heavy legs. Now, the reason why I went into that tangent to come back to Musetti, this is something that I feel like Musetti could work on. He's got a lot of shots in his toolbox, and I feel like he could play the kind of game where the opponent runs a lot. He'd drop shot, lob, slice, make the opponent bend down for shots at during a 14-shot rally where they're already on the court for 2.5 hours and their legs are fatigued, force them to bend down. And make them run, give them different looks. This is something that he could pull off. But then again, to play like this, you have to think proactively. You have to think, I'm taking the initiative. I'm driving the point. My opponent is going to react to my shots. I'm going to make him run. And I'm not sure that Musetti plays with that frame of mind completely. A lot of times I see him react to the opponent's shots, get balls back, put balls back into the court so that the opponent gets frustrated and misses. So, that could be one route to take for Musetti. I'm, just an opinion.
No, I mean, it's a fantastic point because I do feel like I watch him play a lot and I'm thinking like he's going to get tired with this kind of style because he does run a ton with the way that he plays. And yeah, if he can do some of that to his opponents, that could be that could make him so much more dangerous. So, but nonetheless, I mean, it's I felt like this ATP Finals was much more entertaining than last year and some previous editions that we
Agreed.
had. And I enjoyed it immensely, and it was nice to finish it off the way with Sinner and Alcaraz, and it gives us some great storylines for next year. And yeah, I mean, do you have any other kind of takeaways or things from
No,
observations?
it was. I agree with you. It was a great week of tennis, and I remember the golden days of Masters back at Madison Square Garden, New York, and I'm not sure if we'll ever catch that kind of brouhaha, in terms of entertainment. But this was a very entertaining ATP Finals. I felt like each day there was a good match to watch, and I went into the semifinals, for example, yesterday thinking, well, Carlos and Jannik are going to win. Obviously, it's going to be no contest. These semifinals are just a formality. But both semifinals, even though the outcome didn't change, were entertaining to watch. It was good tennis. So yeah, I agree with you. It was a plus for men's tennis this week.
Totally agreed. Yeah, the producers mentioning no 3-set final since Turin. Yeah, that is true. But I think this final will also go down as a great straight sets match. So
yes, yeah. As long as this kind of tennis is being shown, I think it adds tennis fans to the tally, and I felt like it was a very entertaining final, even though it was 2 sets, 7-6, 7-5. There was drama. It was good that one of the players was from the home crowd. One of the players was from Italy. It added to the challenge, but good week, good final.
Yeah, and this was a great conversation, but it's been a blast to sort of pick your brain as usual on many different topics.
No,
Good
I
stuff in the
appreciate it,
comments,
Vansh.
guys.
It's great to talk to you too. You don't be too humble. You definitely know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks. And good comments in the chat, guys. Keep it up. Keep subscribing to Talking Tennis, and we'll be back with I'm sure next week Davis Cup, and some good topics for, I guess now is when we go into that mode where we think about like the best matches of the year and that kind of thing in December when we have no tennis on the main tour. So nonetheless, stay tuned for all the content with that, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.